Hi everyone, this is Marina from Frocks Frolics and we are back for the Tilly and Betsy combo, and this time we're going to sew the Betsy skirt. The Betsy skirt is again also available for the girl size, and that goes from age 1 to 12. I've made this very much like the girl's skirt. There isn't much difference. I've even put the pockets in. But I just want to point out that you can leave the pockets off. There's no need to put pockets into it, but as you can see here, I've put the proper pockets in. So if you want to practice pockets, then yeah, go right ahead. You've got all the options as you do with the girl's skirt. You can put on that extra trim here, or you can leave it off. I think it's super sweet. It's got a very flat front, same as I did with the Bonnie skirt actually. I do like the flat front. I think it makes it look, more stylish. It's not just elasticated. And then we've got a proper placket down the front. It's not hard. I'm showing you exactly how that's done. So I hope that you learn a lot making this. And I've already cut out everything ready to go. So let's have a look at the pieces we need to make this beautiful Betsy skirt. To make the front closure, we have got a placket here and we cut that twice, and then we are going to iron it lengthways in half, and you can put a little bit of interfacing on one side if you want to. It's not really necessary for door clothes, but it just makes it all a bit firmer and it's good practice as well. Then next we have got the pockets. You can also leave the pockets off. You do not have to actually put them in. But if you want to practice the pockets, like I said, then that's a good idea. And we need 2 pairs of those. So if you want to have no pocket, you just have to cut that part off. It's quite simple. And then for your back piece here, we have got a piece which is cut on the fold or as one piece, and I'm also adding a trim. So along this line I am going to fold up my pattern so it's a little bit less and use the red trim. And here you can see that also you could cut this pattern in one. I do like it sometimes if you don't have very much fabric, it's just easier if you can open out your piece. So cut it on the fold or cut it as one piece. But what you must do is then mark the center back, and then you're ready to go for that. The front part is cut in 2 pieces, and there we need to have it mirror image, and we're doing the same again. We're going to fold it up along that dashed line to cut it out, and then we have our 2 pieces here, a pair or mirror image. Now the trim comes in 3 pieces, 2 front pieces and 1 back piece, and it's folded lengthways in half, and then that gives you this beautiful finish here. Now anyone that wants to do the trim in one go, of course, can do that. If you have enough fabric and it's long enough and you're not working with a fat quarter, then of course just have those pieces overlapping and cut it as one long bit. You can do that as well, that's absolutely fine. And then finally we have the buttons here that go one on the waistband and then another couple on the actual skirt. And the waistband, you can see, has like the dashed lines. That is where we're going to attach our elastic, and you could also use KamSnaps if you like. So let's get started with sewing this together. Now the first thing to do if you are putting in the pockets is to put the pockets down right sides facing on your pieces and put just the 1 pin in. That's absolutely enough. And then we're going to sew them together. You can do a foot with seam allowance here, it doesn't have to be a centimeter, and sew them on. Once you've done that, you want to serge that edge, then iron the seam towards the pockets. And we're ready to put them together. So take your front piece, put it down onto the back piece with the right sides facing, and we're going to pin along the pocket here, and then we're going to sew it together. And while we're at the sewing machine, we're also going to close the trim. So we're going to put 1 front trim piece to the back, and then on the other side we do the same and we sew those together as well. While we're at the sewing machine, we're using 1 centimeter seam allowance, and you're going all the way down to the point that you will turn into your pocket. So needle down and turn. And as you come around the curve, you want to have the needle in the fabric when you turn, and then just move it along bit by bit. And when you come back into the side seam, sometimes it feels like, oh man, you're already there. And then it's another stitch, like in my case here, and yet another stitch. So we have to do that. Turn and then go to the end. And we do the same on the other side, and then we need to overlock this, and I would recommend that you turn off your knife on your overlocker so you don't cut into anything when you serge or overlock that edge. And then we're sewing together the hem trim as well, and you can put the next piece right under like I'm doing here, and that is it. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to iron those seams apart, and then we're going to iron it also lengthways in half so we get a nice folded edge. There we go. And now we can put it onto the skirt. So you just go to one end. The rough edges are all on top of each other. And now I'm putting my side seam on side seam. And there we go, back to the sewing machine. Sew this together, 1 centimeter seam allowance. And we'll sew all the way to the end, making sure that the rough edges are all on top of each other. Make sure that you serge the seam and then move it into the skirt, and make sure that your pocket is not in the way, and then you top stitch it with a stitch length of 3 or 3.5 all the way across. And also what's really nice, if you wanted to embellish that hem trim, of course that is beautiful as well, and set a really nice accent for that. Now we're going to put the placket onto both sides. The side with the interfacing on should be facing you here, and you need to leave a centimeter standing at the hem. That is going to be turned up, but if you start pinning it from the top edge, it's automatically right. Next, sewing machine again, sew it together using your seam allowance of 1 centimeter. And now the next step is that the other side should be serged really. I'm doing it afterwards, but you could do it now. So you fold over so that the top seam allowance stands into my little placket and the one behind it is loose. And we want to have that serged as well. As you can see now here, it is serged. And I'm closing that little seam, giving me a really nice finish on my placket end here. And then we're going to turn it and move out the corner, and you can here see my serging. That's important that that edge is serged if you don't want to turn it in. And then we just top stitch it down, and while we're at the sewing machine we're going to add our gather stitches. You want to put one gather stitch all along the top edge close to the edge, so about 2-3 millimeters off, and then the next one foot width next to that. Make sure you leave a long thread hanging so that we can pull on those and they don't slip in, and we'll have to do it again. We don't want to do that. And you only do it from placket to placket. Now we can put the waistband on. So if you haven't marked your waistband yet for the center back, then you might want to do that now. Put a little snip in, and then we're going to align this snip with the snip we did earlier for the center back. And then we're going to pull our gather threads, that's our bobbin threads in this case, and they're always easier to pull, which is why you should have the good side of the fabric facing up when we are putting in the gather threads. And when it's a little bit tighter than you actually need, put the waistband and the skirt together here. We need 1 centimeter seam allowance standing over the edge and simply pull it to fit, at which point you can then secure those gather threads with a vertical pin and then wrap around there the thread in a figure of 8, and then we can distribute our gathers so they look halfway decent. They don't have to be perfect at that point, they just have to be okay. Now do the same on the other side. You pull your gather threads and you can see blended in more of our doll collection. Everything that is in the vintage collection you will also find in the doll collection, plus way more. And here you can just see the western shirt, and now it's the bell dress. Oh, it's just beautiful what's coming up for you. And now I'm securing that thread again, making sure it's all good. And the rest of the adjustment of my gathers I actually do under the sewing machine, so it doesn't have to be perfect at this point. So over to the sewing machine, we're sewing between the 2 stitch lines. Make sure the stitch length is put back down to 2.5 and not left on the large stitch length, and then it just has to sit edge to edge. I'm holding it quite taut here with my left hand, and my right hand adjusts the gathers with a pin, and then I'll sew together. Do the same on this side. So much easier to adjust them like this than when it's on your table. There we go, all the way to the end. More adjustment might have to be done. There we go, see, it's so simple. Make sure you have that centimeter standing over the edge. And no gathers on the placket, of course. Now you want to take your waistband, put it on top of each other with the seam allowance facing up into the waistband, and check that you actually have the right length so that it will look good when these plackets overlap. If not, please rectify. And if you're satisfied everything is good, then you can take out the lower gather thread and leave the top gather thread in. Nobody will ever see that one. And then you're pressing the seam into the waistband. I think all these tips that I'm giving you here are good for any skirt, not just my patterns. So you can take something away from this, I'm sure. Make sure that the front is really nicely ironed as well. And now we're serging that top edge. Again, we are not going to tuck it in because we want it to be not so thick. Over to the sewing machine, and we're going to fold over the waistband and sew this shut as well in the same way that we've just done before. Super simple. The other side as well. Make sure that you have the same amount standing over both sides so that the waistband has the same height on both sides because they overlap, and you get a really clean and neat finish. Lift out the corner with a pin, and then you want to go and iron that top edge. If you have a pattern, it's particularly easy to do, but if you don't have a pattern, the overlocking needs to just sit a little bit over your edge here, and then we are actually going to create the tunnel for our elastic. And then you want to take a textile marker, and we're going to mark where the elastic starts and ends with that. So I'm just drawing a line. So now I can go over to the sewing machine and stitch my tunnel in. So secure your stitches, and then I'm stitching close to the edge with stitch length 3 or 3.5 again. And that will fit an elastic width of 2 centimeters perfectly. So if you're making a skirt like this without a pattern, just make sure that your waistband is always at 5 millimeters to 6 millimeters wider than your actual elastic, so that it has a little bit of movement room. When it's folded in half, you're coming down to 2 or 3 millimeters movement room, right? So that's what you want to watch out for. Then we'll take the elastic and we're going to thread it through with a safety pin tucked into the end. And we're going to pull it through until we have got 1 centimeter left standing at the end. So careful, and if it goes in, of course, you have to pull it through the other side and start again. And then you can just put a pin there to secure it once you've got that centimeter left standing. That's about right. And then we're going to stitch down and across there. Let's do the other side. Pull it through, and you can take your safety pin off. And I would make sure that the part that you are stitching on is fairly flat. So I've moved my gathers over a little bit from there. Put my pin in here, over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew it and secure it. So now I'm just going to put a pin in horizontal, I think, so that it doesn't come out, because I'm a bit worried with elastic. It's so easy to do that, right? So I'm putting my pin in here horizontally and I'm sewing directly on that line that I have drawn. And then with the needle down, I turn my fabric. I now stitch on the edge of the waistband all the way to the end. And I do that on both of them, of course. And then there's another step that I think looks really, really nice that you do not have to do, but I am top stitching also up the side of my placket and then along the waistband and back down the other side. So I've got a really nice structural feel to my waistband. And of course you could also stitch through the center of your elastic as well. So once you've done this, you could do another line, but that I think should only start from where your elastic starts, right? And you want to stretch it without pulling now so that you get a really nice even line here. And then down the other side. And that's it. Secure your stitches and it's almost done. Now we want to put in the buttonholes. I would say KamSnaps are way easier, so I would do that next time. It's just too small, but I'm going to put a horizontal buttonhole into the waistband and vertical buttonholes into the rest of the skirt. So you want to mark here where the center is and then go over 2 millimeters towards the edge, because of course your buttonhole has that little tack at the end. You need to allow for that. So I know where that is. The other buttonholes will sit right on the center of the placket because they're going down vertically, and I just need to find out where that is. So what I'm going to do here, once I've measured them out and I know where I want them to be, I'm going to mark above my buttonhole instead of just on the center, because that I want to have a bit of room as to where I put my button, right? Because it's going to be almost floating. It's held by the horizontal one, and then the vertical ones are just holding the skirt together, and I can put them a little bit higher and a little bit lower. Now you want to go for a linen buttonhole, a buttonhole that is not too tight, especially with all the seam allowances in it. And electronic sewing machines are particularly notorious for not doing buttonholes well when there's a lot of layers and there is something touching your sensor, which I've pulled down. So any touching of this sensor and the buttonhole will stop. Now I left this in for you because my first attempt here, you can see how it goes back. It must have touched something along the lines here, and then it just hammers in the same place. And I had to unpick it all and then start again. So the mechanical machines where you can pull it a little bit are way better. Here I had a very hard time. In fact, I think I did it 2 times before it was actually working. So if you have a mechanical machine, I would use a mechanical machine. If you're thinking of buying a sewing machine, don't get an electronic machine as your first machine. Whilst the electronic buttonholes look absolutely fabulous when they go into a flat surface, here it was an absolute nightmare. You can see now that I'm doing it on the other side. It does it perfectly, and I've put my button into the buttonhole at the back to get the perfect length of the buttonhole. All that is brilliant, but as soon as you have thicker material or you have something in the way, it's not so easy anymore. And that's just a little tip here. Now all I have to do, the final step, is to cut open my buttonhole and to put them in. And the way I do that is to take my scissor, fold the buttonhole over. I'm using a big scissor. People always go, oh my gosh, she's using the big scissor. Anyway, snip into that, and then I snip to the other side. If you want to do it with a quick unpick, make sure that you put a pin across the top so that you can't slide in and ruin your piece. Now I just have to sew on my buttons. So I have a double thread, I wiggle it around and then let it glide through my fingers, and I have a knot in the end, cut the end off, and I can put in my button. So line up your plackets on top of each other, then go straight through the corner of that buttonhole, and you will find that this will not sit on the center of the placket. It never does. It's the same when you make shirts. That top button for the collar never sits right on the center of the placket. It's just how it works. So good thing to know that. And I'm just going to sew my button on, and I make sure that I have a distance between the head of my button and the skirt so that the button has a little bit of room. So when it's done up, there's room enough for the other part of the skirt to lie underneath the top of the button, you know, and on top of the other part of the skirt. So there you learned something. And yeah, we're coming to the end. I'm just going to sew the buttons on now. These instructions are fairly much like the girl's skirt instructions, and I think it would be really nice to make a matching me and my doll outfit. Would be really great. I just love these. I had one like that in the 80s. I love that skirt. And I hope you will too. And it looks very cute on the dolly. And there you go. We're finished. Gorgeous little skirt. And that's it. We're done with the combo Tilly and Betsy. Betsy's skirt finished. And if you want to get either the combo for your girl or for your doll, you can do that at frocksandfrolics.com, either with the vintage collection or the doll collection. And I hope to see you soon again for the next project in our doll collection. Bye for now.